So while the Kennedy Center removes Trump from its facade, Trump is trying to erase something else, his impeachment record. The Wall Street Journal reports, according to people familiar with the matter, that the president and his allies are now working on a plan to erase his 2 impeachments from history, moving to expunge them from the record altogether. Trump told the Journal over the phone this week, quote, "It should be done because I did nothing wrong. It was a rigged deal. It was a whole rigged situation." James Sample is back with us. And I'm not even really sure I need to ask you a question because this sounds sort of familiar.
What does that mean?
Rigged situation over here, over there. Everything is rigged.
There is no mechanism to unring an impeachment, just as you cannot unring a bell. In that particular Wall Street Journal piece, my friend, professor at University of North Carolina School of Law, Mike Gerhardt, called it absurd. And I think that's actually generous. That's a euphemism for what this is. It's a thing that happened in history. And
hey, family. Welcome back, Jack, with you once again. The White House is reportedly pushing to erase Trump's 2 impeachments from history, not reinterpret, but actively expunge them as if they never happened. The unprecedented effort to rewrite the historical record is a move straight out of a dystopian novel. Here's the thing that makes this even crazier. This isn't about pardoning or forgiving those impeachments. That would be one thing, a controversial thing, but a thing that at least makes some kind of legal sense within our existing framework. No. What they're going for is something much more audacious. They want to void them entirely. They want Congress to pass a resolution that essentially says, you know what? Those impeachments, they don't count. Forget they ever happened, move along, nothing to see here. Can you imagine the sheer audacity of that? And I want you to really sit with this for a moment because the implications are genuinely staggering. If this actually worked, if there was any real mechanism for this to succeed,
maybe he could also undo January 6th while he's at it if he's going to undo his impeachment.
Right. Well, and there he's had some success in erasing, conviction.
Rewriting the narrative.
Rewriting the narrative, rewriting. So it's all part and parcel. And look, it is actually consistent with the report you just came off of from Kevin Fry there, right? In a sense, just looking at that TARP, right? The TARP is opaque. You know what's interesting about that opaque TARP is it is so transparently there to hide what's really happening so that we don't get that visual of the actual letters being physically removed.
Yeah, because he definitely didn't have a problem when the letters were going up, and he doesn't have a problem when the name is going up somewhere, but he certainly has a problem when the name is being taken down. But on the impeachment issue for a second, I wonder how much of this is, again, Donald Trump not just trying to recast and rewrite history and the narrative, but prepare for something in the future. And I think the one outstanding question that I think I wonder if, folks like you are even contemplating as to whether or not Donald Trump tries to pardon himself before he leaves office, right? And I think there's no doubt he's going to do it to his family, I suspect. It
would fundamentally change how we understand accountability in this country. It would mean that a president could just decide later that the consequences of their actions don't matter anymore, that history itself can be edited after the fact like a bad Wikipedia entry. But here's where the story gets even more fascinating and complicated. At the exact same time that Trump and his allies are working on this erasure project, Democrats are quietly, methodically, preparing for something completely different. They're not just sitting back and watching this play out. They're gearing up for a future fight, one that hasn't even happened yet, but that they clearly see coming. And this is where the tension in this story really starts to crackle with energy. On one side, you have a push to wipe the slate clean on past impeachments. On the other side, you have plans being laid for potentially brand new investigations, if and when control of Congress shifts hands.
When you see this IRS deal that he cut where he is trying to kind of immunize himself from being audited in the future, his family, his businesses, why not take it a step further and try to pardon himself and his family?
I'd be surprised if he doesn't try that, but I think that you're absolutely spot on in pointing to the IRS immunity deal. I think I understand, and I don't think it's a mistake by any stretch, why so much attention has been paid to the slush fund, right, to the anti-weaponization fund. Let's be clear. The real prize from his perspective was that audit immunity deal, and it is, at least on a relative level, flying under the radar. If you could give yourself something that no one has ever had, right, literally unprecedented, and it was worth $100 million, and you could give it to yourself as settlement for a case that is not actually an adversarial case, and which Judge Kathleen Williams, briefs were submitted as recently as last night in Florida, is considering the question of whether or not there was even a case to settle.
It's like watching two chess masters playing completely different games on the same board, each one setting up pieces for moves that won't happen for months. The Democrats aren't even waiting to see how this resolution plays out. They're already thinking 2 steps, 3 steps ahead, planning their response to scenarios that haven't even materialized yet. That's how high the stakes are in this political battle. That's how much is riding on the outcome of the upcoming elections. So let's take a step back and really understand what we're dealing with here, because a lot of people have forgotten just how significant it was that Trump was impeached twice. This isn't just some minor footnote in political history. This is genuinely unprecedented in the history of the United States.
That would be a pretty significant gift. We don't have precedent on point as to whether self-pardons are a legitimate mechanism. I suspect the Supreme Court would say it's a political question and they wouldn't touch it.
Well, and why would he even need a self-pardon if he has presidential immunity? Would he need it?
He has changed the law in numerous ways, including in 2024 in Trump v. United States, when the Supreme Court gave the president an immunity that was never before recognized. You're absolutely right, Elise.
So as we, this whole weekend sort of kicks off the America 250 theme and the celebrations leading up to July 4th, the nation's birthday. You're a constitutional law expert. What do you think our founders would think, if they were to be dropped down and be able to visit Washington, D.C. and get caught up in what's been going on in the country right now on its 250th birthday? What do you imagine would be going through their minds?
Well, the founders were flawed. Sometimes I think we make the mistake of romanticizing them as perfect people. They were flawed just as we all are. But I think that my assessment of where we are at age 250 is that there are real reasons for concern.
To really grasp the magnitude of what we're talking about, we need to go back and remember how we got here in the first place. The first impeachment came in 2019, when the House of Representatives voted to impeach Trump on 2 specific articles. The first was abuse of power, a charge that essentially alleged he had used the power of his office for personal political gain. The second was obstruction of Congress, claiming he had interfered with the congressional investigation into his actions. That alone would have been historic. No president in American history had ever been impeached in their first term and survived to run for re-election. But then came 2021, and everything changed again.
But that the situation is not hopeless. And the examples that I would point to for hope are the kinds of things we've seen even in just the last year and a half. The people freezing in the cold in Minnesota who didn't complain for an instant about being out there. That's the kind of America that we can be. And I think that's the kind of America that, frankly, we need to be if we're going to make it another 250. I think they would be concerned about the devolution of separation of powers. I think they would be stunned at the power of the president and the impotence of Congress, whether by choice or by force.
So Trump has continued his trend of appointing personal lawyers into plum positions within his government. James McDonald has been selected to lead the New York Federal Prosecutor's Office. What do you make of that appointment?
Well, I think the president has the right to appoint or to nominate the people that he wants to nominate. I think that it is up to the Senate under our system to take Senate-confirmed positions and subject them to the scrutiny of a confirmation process that is meaningful.
After the events at the Capitol on January 6th, the House voted to impeach Trump a second time. This time, the charge was incitement of insurrection. Now you have to understand what this means in historical context. Nobody, not one single president in the entire history of this country, had ever been impeached twice. Ever. Now in both cases, the Senate ultimately acquitted him. He was never removed from office. But here's the crucial detail that a lot of people misunderstand. Those impeachments themselves, the House votes, the formal charges, they still happened. They're part of the permanent historical record. Whether anyone likes it or not, the fact that the Senate didn't convict doesn't erase the House's action. It just means the process didn't result in removal. And this is where we need to talk about what impeachment was actually designed to be in the first place. The founders who wrote the Constitution created impeachment as a last resort, a nuclear option for checking presidential power when everything else had failed. They didn't envision it becoming a regular tool of political warfare. They saw it as something so serious, so consequential, that it would only be used in the most extreme circumstances. So the fact that Trump was impeached, not once but twice, in two completely different terms, with two totally different sets of charges, that's historically significant no matter how you slice it. It's the kind of thing that gets written into history books and taught to school children for generations. For better or worse, depending on your political perspective, those two impeachments are now part of the permanent record of Trump's presidency. And that's exactly why this push to erase them matters so much. It's not just about getting rid of one bad headline or burying a single embarrassing story. This is arguably the single most repeated criticism of his entire political career. Every time there's a debate about his fitness for office, every time historians look back at his time in the White House, those two impeachments come up like clockwork. They've become a permanent asterisk, a constant reminder of the controversies that surrounded his administration. So when you understand that context, the push to void those impeachments makes a certain kind of sense, even if it's legally impossible. It's about legacy. It's about how history will remember one of the most consequential and controversial presidencies in American history. And this is where the reporting gets really interesting. According to multiple sources, and confirmed by a White House official, this effort is real. This isn't some fringe idea or a rumor floating around the internet. This is coming from people close to the administration who are actively working on making it happen. The question everybody should be asking right now is whether Congress can actually do this. Can they just pass a resolution and make history disappear? The short answer, and I want to make this incredibly clear, is no. They absolutely cannot. And we're going to dig deep into exactly why that is. Because this is where most people online are getting the story completely wrong. The constitutional framework simply doesn't allow for this kind of retroactive erasure. Once something has happened and been recorded, you can't just vote to make it unhappen. That's not how any of this works. Let me hammer this point home because it's absolutely crucial to understanding the entire story. There's a massive difference between what this resolution can actually accomplish and what people online think it can accomplish. And that gap is where all the confusion and misinformation is coming from. Here's where I need every single person watching to really pay attention, because this is the part that gets twisted the most in headlines and social media posts. A lot of people are seeing headlines that make it sound like this is already done, like Congress waved a magic wand, and suddenly the impeachments never existed in the first place. That is not what's going on here. And honestly, it can't be what's going on because of how the Constitution is actually written. Let's walk through the mechanics for a moment, because understanding the process is the only way to understand why this resolution is so limited in what it can achieve. The Constitution lays out a very specific process for impeachment. It's not complicated. The House of Representatives has the sole power to impeach. That's basically like an indictment, a formal accusation that the president has committed some offense. Then the Senate holds a trial and decides whether to convict and remove the president from office. That's the whole system. That's everything the Constitution says about the process. Nowhere in that document is there a section that says, and if the president doesn't like being impeached, here's how you undo it later. It just doesn't exist. There's no provision for retroactive reversal. There's no mechanism for making something that happened go away after the fact. Once the House votes to impeach, that vote is a historical fact. It happened on that date, at that time, with those specific charges. It was recorded in the official congressional record. You can't pass a new resolution years later and legally erase that from the record because there's no constitutional mechanism to do it. The Constitution simply doesn't provide for it. Think of it this way. Imagine you got a speeding ticket 5 years ago. You paid it, it's on your record. It's part of your driving history. Now imagine your local city council votes on a resolution saying, "We hereby declare that ticket never happened." Does that actually erase the ticket from the record? Of course not. The council doesn't have that power. It's the same basic idea here, just on a much bigger, much more dramatic scale. Congress passing a resolution doesn't rewrite the Constitution. It doesn't rewrite history books. It doesn't rewrite court records or the official congressional record from when those votes actually took place. The legal reality is that this resolution, if it even passes, would carry minimal legal weight precisely because there's no constitutional mechanism for reversing something like that after the fact. So then the question becomes, why bother? Why would Trump and his allies even try this if it doesn't actually do anything legally? And honestly, that's the real story here. This isn't about law. This is about politics. And more specifically, it's about legacy. Think about how Trump's opponents have used those two impeachments for years now. Every time there's a debate about his fitness for office, every time there's a historical retrospective on his presidency, those two impeachments get brought up. Twice impeached. It's become this permanent asterisk next to his name in the history books. And if you're Trump and you care deeply about how you're remembered, that asterisk probably drives you absolutely up the wall. So a resolution like this, even if it has zero actual legal effect, still does something politically. It gives Trump and his supporters something to point to. It lets them say, Congress voted to void those sham impeachments. Even if legally, technically, constitutionally, nothing actually changed. It's a symbolic move, but symbolic moves matter a lot in politics. They shape the narrative. They give talking points to supporters. They create headlines. And in a world where most people don't read past the headline anyway, a resolution like this can absolutely shift public perception, even without shifting the actual legal reality one single bit. This is honestly a strategy we've seen play out over and over in politics on both sides of the aisle. You don't always need to win the actual legal battle to win the political one. Sometimes just forcing the vote, just getting the headline, just getting your side of the story out there louder than the other side. That's the whole point. It's not about changing what happened. It's about changing how people remember what happened. And in an era where most political fights get decided in 30-second clips and social media posts, that kind of narrative control can be incredibly powerful, even when the underlying legal reality doesn't budge an inch. Now let's flip over to the other side of this story, because this is where it gets even more interesting and where the stakes start to become genuinely massive. While Trump's team is working on erasing the past, Democrats are quietly building plans for the future. Specifically, they're planning for what happens if they win back control of the House of Representatives in the upcoming elections. According to multiple reports and sources, House Democrats are laying the groundwork for potential hearings, subpoenas, and document requests targeting companies and financial institutions connected to Trump's political and business networks. This is methodical, deliberate work. They're building an investigative infrastructure that would be ready to deploy if they take control. Now here's the part that a lot of people online are getting wrong on this side of the story too. This is not, and I repeat, this is not a current impeachment plan. A lot of headlines and social media posts are making it sound like Democrats are already gearing up to impeach Trump a third time. That's not accurate, at least not based on what's actually been reported and what's actually happening. The reporting is pretty clear that impeachment is being treated as a possible later option, something that could come into play down the road if future investigations actually turn up evidence of impeachable conduct. It is not the immediate plan. Right now, we're talking about the groundwork, hearings, subpoenas, requesting documents, the investigative stuff that happens before anyone even starts talking seriously about impeachment. And honestly, that groundwork matters more than people realize. Subpoenas alone can take months to fight out in court if a company or individual decides to resist. Document requests can drag on even longer, especially when you're dealing with complex financial institutions and business networks. So, even if Democrats wanted to rush straight to impeachment, the practical reality of how these investigations actually work would slow them down anyway. Building a real case takes time, takes paperwork, and takes a whole lot of legal back and forth before anybody's talking about articles of impeachment. So why does this distinction actually matter? It changes the whole tone of the story. This isn't Democrats are about to impeach Trump again. This is Democrats are positioning themselves to have the tools ready in case they need them. That's a much more calculated, much more patient strategy than a lot of the viral headlines are making it sound like. And honestly, that kind of patience makes sense politically. Democrats already tried impeachment twice with Trump, Both times, the Senate acquitted him. So if they're being smart about this, and it looks like they are, they're not going to rush into a third attempt without solid evidence backing it up first. They want to build the case before they make the move, not the other way around. That actually lines up with a broader lesson Democrats seem to have learned the hard way. Rushing into impeachment without airtight, undeniable evidence gives the other side room to call it political theater. And honestly, that's exactly what happened both times with Trump. Republicans painted both impeachments as rushed, partisan, politically motivated. Whether you agree with that framing or not, it clearly stuck with a big chunk of the country. So if Democrats are being smarter this time around, building the investigative record first before making any big moves, that's at least partly a response to how the last two attempts played out in the court of public opinion. They're learning from experience and adjusting their strategy accordingly. That's just good politics. And that's exactly why the elections matter so much here. Trump himself has been very open about this. Surprisingly direct, actually. He's told Republicans straight up that they need to win control of Congress to prevent Democrats from launching these kinds of investigations. That's a pretty direct admission that this whole thing is a numbers game. Whoever controls the House controls the subpoena power. Whoever controls the House controls what hearings get scheduled, what documents get demanded, what gets investigated, and what doesn't. So this isn't just some abstract political maneuvering happening far away from your life. This is a fight over who gets to hold the keys to congressional oversight for the next 2 years. And that fight is going to get decided by voters at the ballot box. The power dynamics here are clear, and they're significant. Let's talk about what a House majority can actually do, because I think a lot of people overestimate or sometimes underestimate the power that comes with controlling that chamber. A House majority can hold hearings on any topic they choose. They can issue subpoenas, forcing people and companies to hand over documents or testify under oath. They can make criminal referrals if they find evidence of wrongdoing and send that information to the Justice Department. What they cannot do on their own is convict or remove a president. That still requires the Senate, and it still requires a 2/3 majority there to actually convict. So even in the most aggressive scenario where Democrats win the House, launch a dozen investigations, and find serious evidence of wrongdoing, actually removing Trump from office would still require Senate Republicans to cross party lines in huge numbers. That's an incredibly high bar, and it's worth remembering before anybody gets too far ahead of themselves with predictions about what comes next. Let's be honest about how rare Senate conviction actually is in American history. It has never happened to a sitting president. Not once. Trump was acquitted twice. Andrew Johnson was acquitted back in the 1800s. Bill Clinton was acquitted in the 90s. Richard Nixon resigned before the House could even vote on articles of impeachment against him. So if you're betting on history, actual conviction remains an incredibly steep uphill climb, no matter how strong the evidence ends up being. That doesn't mean the investigations are pointless. They can still produce real consequences, real headlines, real political damage. But actual removal from office through this process has simply never worked. Not one single time in the entire history of the country. So when you step back and look at the full picture here, what you've actually got is two sides preparing for a political war that's going to be fought over the next several months, all building toward the elections. Trump's side wants to erase the past, to scrub the record clean of those embarrassing impeachments. Democrats are preparing tools for the future, investigative mechanisms they could deploy if they gain power, and neither side right now has the power to fully get what they want. The resolution to void the impeachments almost certainly won't pass. And even if it did, it wouldn't have any real legal effect. The Democratic investigations only happen if they win the elections. And even then, they'd face massive logistical and legal hurdles. So let's break down what actually matters here and why. This is the most important fact in the entire story, and it's the one that gets buried the most in flashy headlines. Trump's resolution to void his impeachments will not actually change history, no matter how it's framed politically. The Constitution has zero mechanism for reversing a completed impeachment. Multiple sources have confirmed this directly. Once the House votes to impeach, that's a permanent historical fact. You can pass 100 resolutions trying to say otherwise, and it won't change what actually happened. But symbolic doesn't mean meaningless. This is something people get wrong all the time in politics. Just because something doesn't have legal teeth doesn't mean it doesn't matter. This resolution, even if it never changes a single legal fact, gives Trump and his supporters a talking point. It gives them a headline. It gives them something to point to when the conversation about his impeachments comes up again. In the world of politics, controlling the narrative is often just as powerful as controlling the actual outcome. So don't dismiss this as pointless just because it won't hold up in any real legal sense. On the Democratic side, this is not an impeachment plan. Despite what a lot of viral posts are claiming, what's actually happening is groundwork. Hearings, subpoenas, document requests, all targeting Trump's business and financial networks. If Democrats retake the House, impeachment is a possible later option, not the current plan. This distinction matters because it shows a more patient, calculated strategy than a rush political attack. They're setting up the tools first. Whether they ever actually use those tools for impeachment depends entirely on what those investigations turn up. This entire story is really about the elections and about who controls congressional power going forward. Trump has directly said Republicans need to win to keep Democrats from launching these investigations. That's the real stakes here. Whoever controls the House controls subpoena power, hearing schedules, and document requests. This is a fight over oversight itself, not just a fight over one man's legacy. And that fight gets decided by regular voters at the ballot box. Whoever wins this quiet battle over positioning and preparation is going to have a massive advantage once the elections are over and the real fighting begins. So, who actually benefits here and what comes next? If Trump's resolution passes, even symbolically, that's a win for him heading into election season. A talking point, a rallying cry, something to hand his base. It doesn't erase the history books, but it lets him claim a kind of political victory regardless. On the other hand, if Democrats retake the House and their investigative groundwork starts producing real findings, that sets the stage for a much more serious confrontation down the road, one that could eventually put impeachment back on the table for real, not just as a talking point. What comes next is really all about the elections. Watch how hard both parties campaign on this specific issue. Trump pushing to erase the impeachments narrative, and Democrats being careful, deliberately vague about exactly what they'll do with subpoena power if they win. Watch whether that resolution to void the impeachments actually gets a vote, or if it quietly stalls out in committee the way a lot of symbolic resolutions do. And definitely keep an eye on what Democratic investigations, if they get the chance to run them, actually uncover. Because that's the piece that could turn this from a political sideshow into something with real lasting consequences. There's also a broader lesson here about how modern politics actually works. Big dramatic reversals, the kind you see in movies, almost never happen overnight. Real political shifts happen through months, sometimes years, of exactly this kind of quiet positioning. A resolution here, a subpoena there, a hearing that barely makes the evening news individually. None of these things feel like a huge deal, but stacked together over time, they can completely reshape the political landscape. That's what's happening right now with this story. Even if it doesn't feel as dramatic as a courtroom showdown or a Senate trial, here's the bottom line. Trump wants to rewrite how history remembers him. Democrats want the tools ready in case they need to hold him accountable again. And neither one of them actually has the power to fully deliver on that right now. It all comes down to what happens at the ballot box. This is one of those stories that looks small on the surface, but it's really about who controls the next 2 years of oversight over the most powerful office in the country. Between now and the elections, this fight is only going to get louder, and we'll be right here breaking down every twist as it happens. One more thing, because it's worth repeating clearly. This is not Trump erasing impeachments, and it's not Democrats impeaching Trump again. Both of those takes are getting way ahead of what's actually documented. What we actually know is this: a symbolic resolution with no real legal power on one side, an early-stage investigative groundwork with no impeachment plan yet on the other. That's the honest version. No erasing history, no new impeachment. Just two sides positioning themselves for a fight that's going to play out over the next several months. Government moves slowly. By design, checks and balances prevent dramatic overnight change. Whether Trump's resolution passes or Democratic investigations gain traction, both will take time and maneuvering. But symbolic moves can turn into real consequences faster than expected, so stay locked in. This fight is just beginning.